Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we are going to go over a bunch of deck options that you can take to this weekend's Explorer Best of 3 qualifier weekend, whether you're going to be doing the Friday qualifier play-in or you've already qualified and you want to play in the main event, try to win and stamp your ticket to the Arena Championship. So we're going to go over a bunch of different deck lists today that have high win rates or reasonable choices to attack the meta based on the data that we're going to get from Untapped.gg, which tracks user win rates, aggregates it, gives us a bunch of cool stats. If you want to get started with Untapped, the link is in the video description. I'll paste and timestamp all these deck lists in the video so you can kind of go as you want and just copy paste the deck lists into play. So we're going to cover what the current ladder popularity of the decks are, and then we're going to go into the win rates themselves. Important thing to always note is popular decks doesn't necessarily correlate to highest win rate decks. People will play decks because they're the pet decks or they have the cards already. They're kind of invested. So it doesn't necessarily correlate, but it's things to be mindful of what you could potentially expect going into the format. So we'll jump into it. We're going to look about last 2 to 3 weeks worth of data, basically from the Time Explorer anthology. There hasn't been much of a shift anyway, so we'll look at a bigger sample pool as well. You'll notice really quick on the bottom left-hand corner, we are trying to hit 10,000 subs on the channel. We're currently at 9690-ish, so just under 300 away. So if you haven't subbed to the channel, free, easy, helps out. We do a whole bunch of metagame coverage for every format, best of 1, best of 3 on Arena. So if you want to know the best decks every week for each format, you can check it out here, and we'll do that. But we're going to jump in. So looking at popularity of the day, so this is, well, May 9th, just ignore it. We're just looking at popularity of the day. Mono Green Devotion is the most popular deck on the ladder, followed by Azorius Lotus Field Control. Basically, Strict Proctor, Lotus Field kind of combo of cards to get ahead on mana. Rakdos Sacrifice, Rakdos Midrange, kind of rounded up, very close in terms of percentage. You have the Temur Creativity combo, and then you have pretty stark drop in terms of like mid-5s of Abzan Greasefang, Mono White Humans, as well as the Azorius Spirits deck. If we look at the last week or so, we see Mono Green has a pretty big jump in terms of popularity. If we look at from the beginning of August, it was about 6.5, it peaked at 15, and is kind of coming down where we see this Lotus Field Control deck since the inception of the Thespian stage just really creep up in terms of popularity. We're also seeing an increase in creativity, in part because the combo was brought to Arena, as well as Rakdos Sacrifice picking up popularity. Rakdos Midrange has kind of fallen off, given some of the combo decks, stuff of that nature. So we're going to jump it in. No particular order, we're just going to cover off some deck lists today that could work for the format. So we're going to start off with Mono Green Devotion. So this is a Nykthos ramp deck. So you'll notice with the Nykthos Shrine to Nyx, there's a couple of flex spots in the deck that you can kind of customize to your discretion. So the core of the deck, you got Elvish Mystics, Wolfwillow Havens to ramp, Cure lets you tap and tap, preferably Nykthos to generate a whole bunch of mana. Old Growth Trolls, Pelucranos are in here to give you 3 devotion each, just really pay for themselves. And then you can go Cavalier of Thorns that helps you dig to find your Nykthos, as well as Storm the Festival to find your powerful threats, including Karn the Great Creator. Karn gives you access to a artifact wishboard, which we'll look at below, that kind of helps you find key cards that you might need for any particular instance or matchup on the ladder. The flex spots, and this list in particular, is running 2 Nissa Who Shakes the World and a single copy of Vorinclex. A lot of the lists are running Invasion of Ikoria, the 2-mana battle that lets you look. It's basically kind of an Oath of Nissa adjacent card, which we don't have from Pioneer into Explorer. Those lists will be running it as a 3 of, so you can kind of play with those numbers as you wish. If you want to go Nissa, you can. It's a little bit more Winmore, I think, at this point. Vorinclex is fine. It's a big body that can be a good mana sink into, but I think the Ikoria helps you dig for key pieces and helps you to consistently find Nykthos, ideally as early as possible on curve. In terms of your sideboard, you have Graveyard Hate, Artifact Enchantment Hate, Activated Ability Hates, Trample and Lifelink. Filigree Silex is kind of like your Ratchet Bomb style effect. I personally prefer Karn's Silex since it can scale up and it's faster to blowing up bigger things. This takes multiple turns to kind of set up. While it's good against tokens and it's decent against the creativity deck, I think either have both options or just play kind of one in that regard. Stonebrain for combo hay, Transmogrify to deal with one single big threat. You have your vehicle package, Jessica's Chariot for beatdowns, Sky Sovereign to blow up little things. Mightstone Meatstone can like kill a shield druid, as well as draw you some cards. God Pharaoh's Statue as a tax effect, Cityscape Level to blow up a single threat. Portal to Phyrexia, kind of reanimation style effect, blow up some stuff. And then Great Henge for life gain and kind of card advantage, as well as a land that you can tutor with Karn, the Great Creator. From there, we'll go to Temur Creativity at 55% win rate. So basically the core of this deck, what you're trying to do is make tokens, whether it be stuff like Fable the Mirrorbreaker, Secrets of the Key making artifacts. The big score is kind of the combo element. So you like turn 4, you big score on their end step, untap, play a 5th land, and then you creativity. With 2 targets of creativity, you hit both Xenagos, God of Revels, as well as World Spine Worm. Xenagos targets your World Spine Worm, gives it haste, doubles its power, 30/30 Trampler coming in, deals a whole bunch of damage. There's a bunch of just kind of incidental burn between Spike Field Hazard, Fiery Impulse, Volcanic Spike helps you kind of tuck away these cards here. And then you just kind of have the fair game of like Kiki beats, that you could copy your Kikis, kind of go like Splinter Twin style, and then similar with the Shark Typhoon. Sideboard, you kind of transform in the heavy control matchups to just be like a blue-red control deck. You have Rending Volleys for blue or white things, Aether Gust for red-green, some counterspells, some sweepers, counterspell package, Hallbreaker Horror, and then Coma as your anti-counterspell cards in that format there. We'll then go to the control deck of the format, the Azorius Lotus Field control deck. So 55% win rate, not the highest win rate, but this deck has been very popular on the ladder. The kind of combo of the deck is using Strict Proctor. Then you play the Lotus Field. It counters out the sack ability, so you just get to keep the Lotus Field, so you get to ramp ahead. You could also, on turn 3, if you're in full control mode, play the Lotus Field, discontinuity on your turn for 2 mana, and then it stifles the ability here. From there, what you want to do is use Thespian Stages to copy the Lotus Fields. The fairy can tap 2 lands and basically give you access to 6 mana at a turn. At 6 mana, you can basically time walk your opponent with discontinuity, and then you just win through either like Wandering Emperor, Dream Trawler, or the Hall of the Storm Giants. Sideboard, you have Aether Gust for red-green things. Then it can shut off like Greasefang and Graveyard decks. Also just a life linker against more aggressive decks. Dovin's Vetoes just for the counter mirrors. Faithful Absence for removal. When decks are kind of shifting out their aggressive threats or their removal, you can bring Chromos Sea Shark as kind of a mid-range and a shift from there. Starheim Unleash as really good card against like the heavy discard package. You can foretell it early. And then Rakdos has a hard time dealing with it. Another Dream Trawler as a way to close out games. Hours of Revelation. So if you have 10 or more non-land permanents on the bat, there's collectively 10 or more non-land permanents. This only costs 3 mana to cast, destroy all non-land permanents. Notably, with Lotus Field, that allows you to cast it for 3 mana. You'll also notice in terms of sweepers of this deck, it's opting to play Doomscar over Supreme Verdict. This is because you can cast it from Foretell for 3 mana. This does kind of reduce your effectiveness against the Spirits deck that has the counter spells, but against most other decks, it's just a 3 mana sweeper. And then lastly, you have Niv Mizzet Perrin for the counterspell heavy decks. With the Lotus Field, you're able to cast 3 red that is missing to cast the Niv Mizzet Perrin. One of my favorite cards. Speaking of spirits, we have Azorius Spirits, kind of your tempo deck of the format, 53%. So this is looking to just play kind of Spirit Tribal. You have like Lords and Supreme Phantom. Rattle Chains lets you flash in your other spirits and can be protection for a turn. You have card draw with the Career Obsession, kind of counterspell with Mausoleum Wanderer itself. Lofty Denials, Geist Snare as well. The Spell Queller can pseudo counter something on the stack, slip out the back as protection, and this version's opting to go to Invasion and Gobukan in the main, just a way to have like kind of a Thoughtseize style effect. Catilda for the more aggressive decks as well. You have Mutavaults as your creature lands in these decks. Sideboard, you have Portable Hole as early removal. Aether Gust, as we mentioned, red-green. Declaration of Stone is removal for bigger things. Destroy Evil in there. Another Catilda for aggressive decks. You have the Skyclaves, it's just removal. And then against the heavy removal-based decks, control decks, you can bring in Toskia's Welcome and the Wedding Announcements. We'll then go to 5-color Kruga Fires. So this was pre the Explorer Anthology, these last few decks, so the win rates might be slightly skewed just based on population, but Qualifiers deck was doing pretty well. Might be a little worse into this Lotus Field deck though, just given the availability of counters and then Farewell. But with Karuga, you can only play cards 3 CMC or more. So you're kind of circumventing that with things like Bonecrusher Giant Stomps, Touch of Spirit Realms Blink ability. With the core of the deck, you want to get Fires of Invention out and then free cast 2 things. You could sack your enchantments with Enigmatic Incarnation and kind of tutor up certain big threats. The notable kind of combo of the deck is with Leyline Binding. It could cost as little as 1 mana in this deck through the Triomes, and then you can sack it and then find either Agent of Treachery, Atraxa, or Titan of Industry. You have things like Elish Norn to shut off into ETB, Kenrith, Tolsmir, so a whole bunch of kind of value cards mixed into there. Sideboard, Archon of Emeria for just multi-spell, greedy mana-based decks, Clarion as a sweeper, Mystical Dispute for like the counter, like control matchups, Temporary Lockdown for aggro, and then Leyline of the Void for the like Greasefang decks, graveyard decks, stuff of that nature. Then move to Rakdos Midrange. So this is kind of the grindy out deck of the format. So some of the versions I've seen have been going up to Invoke. This version's opting to go Bankbuster for more of the fair game, give you some card advantage. But it's just playing a bunch of good cards. Thoughtseize for hand hate, including Duress, Fatal Push, Abrade as removal with Go to the Throat, Fable with like Blood Tides, Bonecrusher, Graveyard Trespasser, a couple copies of Karaxa in this version, Shieldred on the top end. Just a bunch of utility lands mixed into there as well. Sideboard, you have more hand hate, activated ability, like Exile kind of on death effects, green and white hate, Ratchet Bomb for tokens, you have more card draw, Graveyard Hate, Hidetsuku for more aggressive things, Mulligan's Command for Artifact, and then Extinction Event. A card that you might want to consider if you are going to be running Rakdos this weekend is Epic Downfall. So 2 mana, exile target creature with power 4 or greater. Really good against the mono green decks. So something just to consider with that. While Noxious Grasp does kill it, they still get the Cavalier or Old Growth Troll death abilities. So something to consider in that respect. From one Rakdos deck to another, we have Rakdos Sacrifice. So this is the Cat Oven deck of the format. This is a deck that you're likely going to see in terms of very popular kind of volume. Kind of the flex card in this deck is Furnace Rain. Some of the decks have been moving to Obnixis main, just given the number of kind of control and bigger mana decks. But Cat, Cauldron Familiar, Oven lets you create a loop of sack. With Mayhem Devil, you can ping a bunch of things. You have Fables that can copy the Mayhem Devils. You have card advantage with like Unlucky Witness and Deadly Dispute. Steal your opponent's small creatures, sack them that way. A bunch of utility with the deck there. In your sideboard, you have Assimilating Glare as kind of a catch-all removal, hand hate, mono white hate, or blue hate, Dampening Sphere for the big mana decks, Graveyard Hate, Furnace Rain to steal bigger creatures, go blank for kind of the control matchups, similar with Omnixis. Necromentia for like the combo decks. You can hit, I would say probably like Creativity obviously comes to mind, but even taking like Farewell or Temporary Lockdown out of some of the decks. Generally, if the, like blue-white control is on Lotus Field, they're not on Temporary Lockdown. But Temporary Lockdown really hurts this deck here. If they're on Yorion control, then they're on Temporary Lockdown, so it's usually kind of the differentiation. Path to Peril is an interesting one here. Not sure why you're playing it. Like you can technically hit like spirits or like some of the low to ground, maybe humans, but humans is probably a good matchup to begin with, but consideration there. You could probably change this to just like another Necromentia. The creativity matchup's really rough, just given that you can't really interact with their artifacts well, and then they have a lot of cheap removal. We then go to humans. So this is kind of the aggro tax deck of the format. So using things like Thalia to tax your opponent. You can have really aggressive starts of like 1-drop, Thalia on 2, Adeline on 3. Adeline dodges 3 mana sweepers for the most part in the format. Copper Coat gives a buff to your team along with Thalia's Lieutenant. Brutal Cathar's kind of removal paired with some ossifications, as well as Brave the Elements for protection. Whole bunch of utility lands, can blow up in artifacts or enchantments with Hopeful Initiate, Giant Killer for big things, Recruitment Officer for card advantage, along with the Knight Errant of Eos. Really clean sideboard here, early aggressive things, Portable Hole, Destroy Evil, for bigger things, Invasion for like the combo decks or just control, Rest in Peace for Graveyard Hate, and then heavy removal decks you can bring in the wedding announcements. To be honest, this is probably what I would play for the event. I like very linear decks that I'd probably play this or Creativity, but I think just this one providing you, it's good into mono green, it's good into the Creativity combo, it's decent into control, you can put a lot of pressure, has a pretty rough Rakdos matchup, both Rakdos, but I think generally speaking, just being proactive, linear, you can really take an advantage of your opponent stumbling. We then go to Abzan Greasefang, so kind of the combo-esque deck of the format as well. Core of the deck is self-milling yourself, so using things like Grizzly Salvage, Traverse, Vessel Essency, Witherbloom Command, Rafine to kind of set up your draw, throw a vehicle into your graveyard, and then use Greasefang to reanimate, give it haste. With Helion, you could hit him for 13 in the air, and then leave 2 4/4 angels behind. This deck is fairly susceptible to graveyard hate, so you'll notice a number of the inclusions in the sideboard can deal with graveyard hate. So whether it be Terra Sunder or Knight of Autumn, graveyard hate for the mirror, Raven Feeblement's kind of mixed into there, is for the white decks, Fatal Push for removal, Hand Hate, and then Liliana for the grindier matchups, control, stuff of that nature, to eat away at their hand that way there. And lastly, this is a deck that during the Metagame Challenge I got 7 wins with. It is, let me do the better picture, Boros Pia. Hit or miss. I've played this deck a bit on the ladder, I've done well. Other instances, I just haven't done that well. The one thing I would say, the card we're missing is Chained to the Rocks. In place of that, I went with both Bone Crusher Giant and Runaway Steamkin. Most lists are one or the other. Playing the deck, I think the card that you want to switch is Kumano. Doesn't really do much in the format. It's very slow. I was experimenting with 4 Shocks. You can play Reckless Rage, the deal 4 damage effect. You can play Fiery Impulse. I generally like cards that are always active, so when you get the Steam train going, it's got a lot of value. The Shock seems kind of weird, but the thing is, it hits all the tokens that could be pretty much made that are non-artifact tokens from Creativity. The Fables, it can hit pretty much anything other than the Big Shark Typhoon. It can hit a turn 1 elf. It could hit pretty much everything out of the sack deck except Mayhem Devil. It hits most of Spirits. So it's got a lot of range in terms of what it can do. I like this deck. It's really fun. My sideboard was kind of built to account for the fact that I was anticipating a lot of Sacrifice. So Leyline of Combustion is pretty close to an auto win. Invasion of Gobukan was for the control matchup. The control matchup is really tough with Lotus Field, I found. I opted against Gengantha. I would say if you want to play this deck, I would probably get rid of a Justice Strike and maybe 1 Leyline, and then play 2 Chandra Torch of Defiance just to help out the control matchup a little bit more. But I have a video on this if you want to take a look. I probably wouldn't play this, but it's a lot of fun if you just want a deck to pick up for Explorer. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Let me know what you think, what you're going to be playing. If you do have any success, drop a comment with the deck that you did it with. In any case, thanks for watching. Hope you have a great one. Stay safe out there.